I shot my very first music video in 60 frames per second because I might just slow the clips down.
You can't do that, Dyson. Your video is not going to look cinematic, and let me guess, you're probably editing in a 60 FPS timeline as well. What's up guys, RoyalZProduction here, and today I'm going to be answering a frequently asked question that I really want to touch on. When to shoot 24 FPS and when to shoot 60 FPS for your music videos. So first off, shooting in 24 FPS is just going to look the most cinematic in your visuals. So here's a quick example. When you shoot in 24 FPS, you want to double your shutter speed from 24. So that brings you to 48, rounded up to 50. So when you're shooting 24 FPS, shoot at 50 shutter. Now you will have to compensate for your lighting and everything with your aperture and ISO when you adjust to 50 shutter, or really any shutter speed or aperture that you want to use on your camera. When you are filming in 24 FPS at 50 shutter, you're going to get a very natural motion blur. So this is 50 shutter, and I'm just going to wave my hand in front of my face. So as you can see, there's a very natural motion blur when I'm doing this. And even when I'm looking at my hands, it's kind of blurry when it's moving. It's not very focused as if my hand was in front of my face like this and I was staring at my hand. Once I start waving it, it gets all blurry. Now when it comes to music videos, and let's say I'm shooting a performance scene. So this is when the artist is singing along with the song. So if I have zero intentions of making this scene slow motion, so let's say I'm on a gimbal, I'm shooting an artist singing along to a song, doing a performance scene, and I have just literally zero intentions of using this clip for slow motion, then what I'm gonna do is shoot in 24 FPS. I usually have this little mental note in my head when I'm shooting music videos that every 3 or 4 performance scenes in 24 FPS, I will switch to one performance scene in 60 FPS. Now the reason why I switch over to 60 FPS for a performance scene, although that isn't that's kind of twisting the rules a little bit for music videos, but I like to just kind of keep that performance scene in 60 FPS as an option to use as B-roll. So when I run a performance scene, I run it from very beginning of the song to the very end of the song. This just gives me more kind of footage to work with. Now, a big reason why I really like to shoot the 60 FPS performance scenes here and there and kind of sprinkle them in throughout my music video sets. So let's say the artist is rapping, I'm shooting in 60 FPS, and let's say I want to clip the artist's voice or whatever, or the clip at the end of his verse, and slow motion that clip for maybe a couple seconds and then speed ramp out and go into a next scene. Or I can go from them rapping and then just go to slow motion and then cut immediately to the next scene after that. I personally really like that type of style, and it just adds like a different type of look to your videos. Now I will say as well, before I get into my last point here, when you are editing music videos, make sure you're editing in a 24 FPS timeline. Even if you shoot majority of the clips in 60, just edit in a 24 FPS timeline. It's gonna look kind of weird if you have shot maybe even majority of your clips in 24 and you're editing a 60 FPS timeline. It's just not gonna make things look as cinematic as it should, and it's just such a little simple thing that you do when you create your project file within your editing software. So as long as you're editing in a 23.98 or 24 FPS timeline, then you should be golden. Now, aside from performance scenes with 60 FPS, 60 FPS comes in clutch when you are shooting B-roll. Now, let's say you're using an entry-level DSLR and you don't have the option for variable frame rate. So I'm talking like 70 FPS or 72 FPS, 96 FPS, 120, 180. A lot of people use the 120 FPS if you're shooting off something like A7S2, A7 III, Lumix GH5, or S1. These will shoot 120 FPS, but let's say you're using maybe a Lumix G7 and you are limited to 60 FPS, and that's the highest frame rate your camera can go to for your slow motion clips. Use that for your slow motion, all your slow motions. So I'm gonna lay over some clips of the latest music video that I shot. Here we're doing like a little bit of a cop chase. So there's a cop car chasing the artist here in this music video. And I knew that I did not want these shots in 24. I wanted them to be slow motion. So what I did was I shot them in 60 FPS. Now, the reason why I shot in 60 FPS rather than a higher frame rate than 120 is because the lighting wasn't very good. Because if I jump to 120 FPS, then I have to double up my shutter speed, which means that I have to compensate with a lower aperture, better lighting, maybe higher ISO. We didn't have any external lighting outside. We were literally just using street lights. So I tried to stick with the 60 FPS just to get those slow motion clips and get the point across that, This is in slow motion, it's a cinematic sequence, and this is all strictly B-roll. Now, if your camera does shoot 4K 60 FPS, which the Lumix GH5 shoots, Lumix S1, S1H, I recommend shooting in the 4K, especially if you're shooting in low light situations. I feel, at least with my Lumix S1, when I bump up to variable frame rates such as 120 or 150 FPS, things get pretty grainy because I'm downscaling to 1080. So if you are shooting in a low lit scenario, be mindful that things can get grainy at 1080p options. So, maybe try to shoot at the 4K 60 FPS option. Or let's say I'm filming shots that, again, I know I want in slow motion and they are strictly B-roll, they're not performance scenes, and I just want that cinematic, smooth, slow motion shot that I will be sprinkling in between my timeline edit for the music video. Then I'll shoot it in 60 FPS. Or a higher frame rate like 120, but a lot of the times I do film in 4K 60 FPS. One other thing I want to mention here as well, I actually do have a 59-page music video ebook guide. So it is a in-depth music video ebook where I basically break down how I set up my music videos as a freelance videographer, and just a lot of tips and tricks in there as for like camera settings, business tips, camera techniques, camera recommendations, lens recommendations, gear recommendations, and so much more. So if you guys want to check that out, I'll leave it in a hover card somewhere up here, as well as in the description of this video and in the comment section of this video. Thanks everyone for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next video. Peace.